Hey, welcome to Citizens Assembly Crucible. We'll measure your ideas using a fixed set of principles. I am your host, Sherwin Shao. In this meeting, we'll hear Joe's idea as evaluated by Staci using 36 holistic principles. Let me do a share screen on what we're doing here. Okay. Shall we start with introductions? Please tell us your name, your country, and the one change you like to see in this world. My name is Sherwin. I am in Vancouver, Canada. And I like to see societal systems motivating contributional opportunities instead of economic opportunities, as scarcity becomes less and less of a problem. Staci, can you go next?
Hi, I'm Staci Gustafson, and I split my time between Northern Michigan and Southwest Texas, and my main focus is holistic community problem solving. Thanks.
Awesome. Thank you, Staci. Ricardo, can you go next?
Sure. I'm in Austin, Texas. And the one thing that I think that I would wish is that, let's see, how can I express it? That there is a big bang of culture, and that big bang of baby bang, I'm sorry, it's a baby bang of culture. And this is the very beginning, okay, of Genesis AA Aleph. And that is going to change the whole world once I figure a way of explaining it in terms that people can understand. It's going to change the whole thing.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you so much, Ricardo. Cynthia, can you go next?
Oh, yes. Thank you so much for asking. My name is Cynthia Leonard. I'm a promoter organizer for agora-iop.org. I currently live in Chicago, and I would like to live in a society that showed love and gratitude openly without mocking other people for it or things of that nature. I think we would all be served well to express more love and gratitude as a whole.
Thank you very much, Cynthia. Cesare, why are you in the dark? Okay. There is some light. Can you go next, Cesare?
Hello, everyone. Cesare Revic from the great nation of USA, living in Chicago. And my main interest is ridiculing overly loving people and also animal liberation and social economic justice.
Thank you very much, Cesare. George, can you go next?
Yeah, name is George Jasinski. I'm in Minneapolis, Minnesota. I'm the host of the U.S. Constitutional Convention meetup. And my important thing right now is runaway wealth inequality.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, George. Chris.
Yeah, so I would like to see the principle of democracy applied to all areas of life. I guess that's about it at this point. I have other interests, but since we're focusing apparently on Constitution issues, I'll just leave it at that. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Chris. And Joe. Finally, Joe. Can you unmute yourself?
I'm Joe. I live in the San Francisco Bay Area, and I am really into trying to figure out new systems to reinvent society, democracy, governance, economy, that kind of thing. And a lot of theory, a lot of fun in that regard, if you're into that kind of thing.
All right. Thank you very much, Joe. And Joe will be presenting today. So I'm gonna share. I have my share screen right now. Our meeting format will go like this. First, the presenter, that's Joe in the middle here, will disregard the top here. That was last week. Presenter reads the idea, and then from the Agora website, and then the reviewer, in this case, Staci, will review that idea, rate it against each of the 36 holistic principles. The presenter will then have time to respond to the principles, potentially agreeing or disagreeing or choosing to improve his idea. Each principle is then highlighted in the chat where the audience comments on the idea in light of that principle. Due to time constraint, sometimes we only select one of the participants to speak out loud because we're going through each of the principles at this time. The presenter will then have 2 minutes to respond to the comments, after which the reviewer will bring up the next principle. Finally, if time allows, we will open up the meeting for a general round of roundtable discussion with all participants. At that time, you can please type hands up and we'll give you a chance to speak in turn. Please do not interrupt each other. At this time, Joe, are you ready to present the idea?
Yes,
And
I am. I'm ready.
Awesome. I'm gonna stop share.
Okay. And does anyone need me to share my screen so you can read the essay as I read it, or would have you are able
Yes,
to
please
yourself?
screen share.
Screen share? Okay, very good. Okay. All right, everyone. Welcome to my screen. So I want to preface this by saying I'm going to make some assertions here. And that I'm going to state my philosophy here. There is not a plan of action in any of this. I am talking about how we should try to reconsider our view on the issues I'm going to be speaking about. And I'm going to assert that I believe some things are rights and ought to be law, regardless of whether or not they're mentioned in the Constitution or any of our laws. I'm going to take that tone with it. So keep in mind, many of the things I say are you're right. I feel it's because they are. It's not because there's some lawmaking body granting you that privilege. I was going to preface this with something else, but I forgot what that was. So I'm going to go ahead and read this, and I'm sure any issues or questions that come up, we'll be able to address them in the course of this presentation. Okay. So this is called Philosophy of the Commons Part 2, Human Innovations and Currencies. Other areas of the commons are human innovations, such as technological innovations and works of art. Inventors deserve a ton of credit, but how can anyone who understands something like the wheel not use it, even without permission? When novel ideas become essential, they need to become public domain. My moral argument is that since copyright is a protection offered freely by the public, it is the public's right not to steal that idea, but to withdraw that protection when it is in their own best interests. Also, in the interest of the public is the incentivization of further innovation through allowing innovators some reasonable amount of time to profit from their idea. There is also the moral argument of respecting the work someone puts in developing that idea, but then there is the moral argument respecting the freedom of others to fabricate the things essential to their lives, even if copying them, or to procure them from an affordable source. Prescription drugs are one such thing. Currency is another human innovation that ought to be understood in the same vein. its essential nature and long history of use ought to relinquish this invention to the public domain as well. And the fact that it is officially forced upon all commerce in our society means that society ought to have complete control of its design and implementation. And further, with fiat currency being imposed upon us, the banking industry has placed itself into a position of trust that none but we, the people, are qualified to fill, making our collective agreements about what represents universally accepted value. These philosophical arguments may not be new, and some have already been behind official policy for a long time. In fact, I'll say most of them because I went and did some research, and there is time constraints on how long a patent can last and that kind of thing before it becomes public domain. But they all ought to be used as the rationale moving forward for bringing a balanced approach to open sourcing our collective wealth of essential knowledge. Our central banking system needs to dissolve all privately held ownership and control tied to it. Whether it can or will do this, communities and individuals still have a right and obligation to come up with something different for the benefit of all. Design and use of cryptocurrencies could be one such method. And that is my essay.
All right, thank you very much, Joe. At this time, we will start having Staci go through each of the principles, and as she and Joe, as Staci and Joe goes through each of the principles, it'll give the audience a much deeper understanding of all the issues. So Staci, can you go ahead with number one?
Thank you very much. Number one, the holistic principle one asks, does this idea diminish anyone? Does it do any harm? My commentary is, and you can write your comments about whether you believe this idea does any harm in the chat, and we will either read your comment or choose somebody to comment orally. Such great changes as are proposed are likely to diminish multiple sectors of people's lives and our economy. Who will conduct the determination of essentiality and withdraw an inventor's or author's rights or protections? Relating to currency, the idea states, quote, relinquish this invention to the public domain, end quote. Such an action does not guarantee it can implement itself in a beneficial and sustainable fashion. Quote, our central banking system needs to dissolve all privately held ownership and control tied to it, end quote. Without an investigation and plan, it could cause immense harm due to its far-reaching nature. Prepare an analysis of the spectrum of such possible diminishment and make it available in legislation for full transparency and informed decision-making. As the idea is fleshed out, more areas for analysis will likely arise. Diminishment is expected with any movement or change. The goal is to assess the change versus the potential benefit.
Okay. So I'll try to address at least one or two of those points you bring up, and thank you for that. First of all, I don't have a down to the last detail idea about how to implement or about what should be implemented. So when I talk about the essential nature of something, I'm going to use maybe some vague comparisons now or some far-reaching ones. Like for instance, downloadable music. Obviously, it's, according to, copyright, and I think there's a moral argument behind it that people ought to pay for that. They shouldn't steal it. If it comes to something like inhalers, really essential things, and there is, say, just rampant price gouging and that kind of thing, I think that collectively we can make a decision that it's right for us to take that patent and use however we want. Just compensation or whatever, just claim eminent domain on it. That's my opinion. And what about some of the other ones you mentioned? I'll try to do one more. Is there, let's see, another one here.
Another one, our central banking system needs to dissolve all privately held ownership and control tied to it.
Yes. Yes. Okay. So the central banking system, of course, the Federal Reserve, it basically prints the money for us and loans it to us at interest, and as if somehow they own that idea. So whether or not they continue to run and own that under the model it's run, I think that we the people have a, I guess, a God-given right to either replace them or just replace the money with something else. That's my opinion.
I don't see any comments in the chat, but I do have a question.
Okay.
Do you have any ideas about how you would change the currency in that fashion? Are you talking about votes for how we're going to establish what we want our currency to represent?
Yeah, actually, that's in another one of my essays. My third essay on the commons, having to do with a skeleton idea around how currency would be justified and generated. Yeah, imagine if when you go to vote for something, if the budget for it is already tied in by either the printing of new currency or the spending of existing stores of currency in the treasury. And imagine if, as you're casting your vote, you see exactly what kind of effect that's going to have on the value of your currency if you print more of it or not. I think that's a way to get instant feedback on something that's, very important to people, is, how's it going to affect the value of my money?
And you believe
that,
I'm sorry,
what?
You believe the people will be making these decisions?
Yeah, it would tie into a system like that, so I'm imagining that one day could happen. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, principle 2 asks, does the idea obey the law? This idea appears to remove some rights from some people, yet still protect others. Also, this idea makes a number of statements seemingly about laws, rights, freedoms, protections, and obligations, which I believe in my limited experience are opinion statements and so need clarification, definitions, and honest language to back their statements of legality, rights, freedoms, and obligations. And just to give one example, I give, quote, moral argument respecting the freedom of others to fabricate the things essential to their lives. I believe that is opinion. We're talking about a freedom of others to fabricate the things essential to their lives, regardless of who is holding the right to that.
Mm-hmm. Right. Okay. Well, a lot of stuff is already in use, as far as how long something can be copyrighted, and when that eventually does become the commons, and usually by the time that happens, some other invention has supplanted it anyway, and I think that's a good way to go. And again, I'm asserting the moral rights, and I am also asserting that whatever thing our government overlooked is that these things still ought to be rights. I don't think anyone gave us our rights. I think they can recognize our rights, but I think they belong to us regardless. Now, there was another thing in here. You were saying that some people's rights, or some people were having, it looks like, rights taken away or freedoms taken away, and others were having freedoms added. Are you talking about the inventor versus the consumer?
This idea appears to remove some rights. That would be that you are going to remove the copyright protections from those people that are deemed having an essential product invention.
Yes, essentially, yeah. Not completely, but say more emphasis placed on the public need than there currently is in this country regarding things that, say, we could find some method of deeming essential, like medications.
Yeah. One more example here. Since copyright is a protection offered freely by the public, it is the public's right not to steal that idea, but to withdraw that protection when in its own best interest. That's your quote from the idea. Mm-hmm. And I looked up it. This is a quote from the U.S. Copyright Office. Copyright is a form of protection grounded in the U.S. Constitution and granted by law for original works of authorship fixed in a tangible medium of expression. So I think that that is contradictory in that as far as obeying law.
Perhaps. And, you know, obviously there are laws existing today that say that a copyright can be so many years. If it's a work of art, it's like 70+ years beyond the lifespan of the author or the one who created it. And if it's something like a gizmo, I think it's maybe like 20 years and from the time of its invention. So that's already been done. I don't think I'm saying anything new in that. I'm kind of just explaining essentially the argument that leads up to why we should have our own currency if we want to. And there are things that allow for that too, but maybe not the way I want to do it.
Does anybody else have a comment or a question that they would like to make? All right, if not, I will move on to principle 3,
Yeah.
and that is be honest and clarify language through definitions. This principle is key in addressing issues in the previous principle. In other words, the use of honest and clear language and definitions will help make the idea of obeying the laws more clear for this idea. Also, follow this principle in preparing the founding documents, governance and management, and where readers are confused, clarify proper documents, etc. Glossaries are key. An example is, this is a quote from your idea, these philosophical arguments may not be new, and some have even been behind official policy for a long time, but they all ought to be used as the rationale moving forward. I believe this needs clarification, evidence, definitions, and transparent language.
All right. Yeah, I guess we kind of addressed that earlier. You know, this by no means a complete work. It's more like just trying to kind of get people on board with the idea. And that's where I'm hoping you guys will make comments here. I wouldn't mind if you shot this full of holes, honestly, especially on whatever the moral philosophical, you know, underpinnings are.
All right. If there are no more comments, I will move on to principle number 4.
And you can type, you guys. Go ahead and use your keyboards.
Yeah. The idea is this idea transparent? Transparency means the ability for all to see. Follow this in creating key documents and policies, etc. The idea gives no plan for implementation, so it cannot be judged against this principle at this stage.
Right.
Joe, did you want to comment on that, or should we move on?
No, you pretty much understand that it is at the stage it is.
Okay. Principle number 5 is simplify. And again, this with no implementation plan, there's not enough to measure compliance at this stage. Did you want to comment on that, Joe?
I'll just say this. When I get into the third essay on the commons, I do a lot of actual say creation of a system, you know, that doesn't define everything, but it says how it could work. So that is something we can maybe tackle in another crucible. I mean, it would take about 2 hours though.
Okay. Principle 6. This asks, does the idea prioritize viability of the whole? And I've combined this with 7. Does it benefit the most in number over the few? It seems clear that the intent of this idea is to prioritize viability of the whole and most in number over the few by supporting the population's access to essential tools and information. This principle could be well used to ensure the beneficiality of this idea if brought to reality.
Okay. And I just want to reiterate too that, you know, I don't want to disenfranchise creative minds, people who invent things. I want them to profit. I want them to prosper and be motivated by any possible means to keep improving society for us. My sense is that it's not really the creative people who are doing all the price gouging anyway. That's not a business-minded sensibility to be an engineer or an artist. I think it's more of a, you know, kind of a numbers cruncher. And a lot of those people don't have a sense of, and not to try and paint people into a corner, but have a sense of what society actually needs. Yeah.
Does anybody have a comment or question? If not, We will move on to Principle 8, which is include all. This idea seems to consider the inclusion of all in its scope. So that commentary is pretty short. Did you have any comments, or should we move on to 9?
Oh, yeah. I guess since we're going to talk about inclusion of all, I want to go back to what I just said earlier. I shouldn't have said data crunchers don't think about what people need. I think they think a lot about it, but I think the more businessly minded people who are looking at just, profit margins and things like that, and, the same CEO who can run a business that has to do with baking can also run a business that has to do with banking, and it makes no difference to them as long as they make a profit. That's the people who I think are kind of like basically tying up things in this capitalistic system. So I might be alienating them a bit, Yeah.
All right, Principle 9. This asks, does the idea create choice over exclusive rules? This idea appears to remove a person's choice to avail themselves of some rights that protect others. That's the copyright. However, it creates a choice to influence the currency they use and to use or create inventions and or have access to information that they may have limited access to otherwise. You have any commentary on that?
I think that is ultimately the goal of creating alternative means of economy to give people a niche that they didn't have before in the economy that we use. There are many people who don't agree that would be a good idea, but I think it's worth trying. It's been done in places like Ithaca, New York, and I think they're still doing it there in other places. So,
what are they trying in Ithaca, New York?
Ithaca Hours. It's been around for a long time. It's their currency basically, and it's been around. I think it's still around.
Could you elaborate on that, please?
Well, it's the idea, and I'm not going to give you a complete picture of it or an accurate one, but essentially that an hour is worth an hour, and if you will do something for somebody, you can actually get issued, say, a note, their currency, to go and spend somewhere and have someone else give you an hour of service or whatever. Yeah.
Very cool.
Yeah, I'd like to talk about that at some point. All right. Does anybody have any questions or comments about Principle 9? If not, we'll move on to 10 and then open up the floor to debate and comments. 10 is create and maintain ecological health. It appears the idea could be created to be in compliance with this principle. There are no red flags at this stage if lawful business practices and green ideas are implemented to offset power consumption and waste created.
Okay, yeah. For me, it has to tie in eventually to what are the constitutional rights of things. You can't just determine everything by a free market. You also have to say, okay, some things are not for sale. Some things cannot be taken for any price. And we already acknowledge that there's human rights. We could do better on that. I think we should acknowledge that there are the rights of the environment, that there are things that have just as much value. And if they can't express themselves, then we ought to at least use enough common sense to say, okay, we could be doing harm. Let's not do harm to these things. Let's consider them. So definitely ecology, environment, endangered species, endangered people, all those things ought to have value automatically placed on them.
Are you saying that is foreseen within this idea?
No, it's foreseen within my third essay, which it is only mentioned. There is not a whole treatise on it. Yeah.
Very good. Thank you.
Thank you.
So we're done with holistic principles, Staci?
Yes, we are.
Okay.
And at this time, let's open up the floor for general comments. I can get it started. Guess a couple of things. One is with respect to intellectual property, some inventions take a huge amount of capital, right? And realize that you know, some may be, you know, more in the domain of need versus want, or, you know, like life-saving drugs or things like that. But still, if it takes a lot of capital investment to get things started, there should at least be some kind of minimum allowable payback, I suppose. To me, like the time constraint almost isn't as important with as the minimum of payback, right? Say, for example, if it takes so long, and then it takes to develop the drug, to get it patented, and then takes so long to get it commercialized, maybe through marketing, and then adapted by all the doctors, and you know, I believe the developers, if they did something good, deserve to be paid back. So what are your thoughts, Joe?
Well, I think everyone deserves to be paid back, and also everyone who's investing in it, and that a large chunk of that in America includes the American public. You know, we use our taxpayer money all the time to pay for the development of these inventions. Oftentimes, ironically, is that even though we put some of the largest amounts of funding into this stuff, we also see the least amounts of benefits in the form of discounted or some kind of reasonable price on these things. So I think, you know, we ought to have some of the benefit of having made this investment, some form of ownership or just some form of agreement.
Yeah, the actual cost or the price to the public for the drugs often is just simple supply and demand, right? Or desperation, I suppose. If some drug can cost somebody, at last I heard, there's some life-saving drug that costs $50,000 or $100,000 per month. Because they can get away with it. And I mean, to me, like, perhaps the pricing should be more reflective of that investment to begin with, right?
Well, it begs the question is, do we have a higher demand here in the United States for things like life-saving drugs because of the fact that we lead such unhealthy lives? May well be the case.
If I can interject here, you have a hand up in the chat.
Yeah,
for
please.
quite a
Yeah,
while now.
right. I should really, yeah, you're right.
I was wondering, so what if the cost of creating this amazing thing is more than can ever be paid for by public use? It may be really essential, but you can't recover the costs just because somebody put an enormous amount of money into it. How do you decide that how much compensation to give somebody who has spent everything on it? Too much.
I'm trying to figure out a situation where that exists, because basically what you're saying is that no amount of money they could charge would ever pay for it.
Correct.
Well, I mean, that sounds like a capitalist dilemma right there. I mean, obviously, if we're under some kind of socialized system, you might have some of the same amount of innovation, but you wouldn't have as much of the issue about how we're going to pay for it. We'd just get the benefits of it. Now we have, by the way, innovative things like the human genome. All right, that was federally funded, and essentially those people who did that project completed that project before the private sector did. And so at least you can show that, yes, we can innovate. Sorry. Yeah.
Well, if nobody else has their hand up, I'm just going to say another question is, how will you determine essentiality? Who, is there a board that you would hire, or just general public vote?
Cynthia did have her hand up a second ago, though.
Oops.
No? Okay, I was wrong. How would I determine essentiality?
Would it be a group, or how would you handle the essentiality element?
Don't know yet. Don't know. I'm trying to create a philosophy. Maybe the next essay could be the philosophy behind what is essential. That sounds like a good essay, actually.
Mhm.
Chris, you have your hand up?
Well, I think essentiality would be, does everyone need it? Like utilities, the internet. We're investing in fusion power. Everyone's going to need power. I think it's not that hard to come, to figure out essentiality. Everyone needs the internet now because business is conducted, public services are conducted on it. Eventually democracy will be maybe conducted on it. So as long as everyone gets access to it, people who make various innovations and make it improve it, there's nothing wrong with compensating those people well. But do we have to compensate someone to the tune of $150 billion like Bill Gates? Was the next worst software really that, that bad? He had a monopoly. Let's face it, he was given a monopoly. So was Comcast. I'm paying more than South Koreans for slower internet service because Comcast has a monopoly on the internet, which was invented by the US government. So, I think these principles are easy for people to understand. I think, but I appreciate everyone going into such incredible detail on this and doing it in such a logical manner. So that's all I have to say.
Thank you
Cesare?
very much, Chris. Cesare, you can have your hand up.
So I've kind of been listening while doing something else. So I don't know how much on point this really is, but I'm a supporter of this idea mostly to keep this concept in my mind until I develop something myself. But the concept of property, intellectual property is very interesting to me, and I think there are some very reasonable ways to handle that, such as like whoever gets a copyright on something, it should be up to them, or a copyright, actually a patent technically, it should be up to them to appraise it at a certain level, and then they should pay a tax on that, on maintaining the patent for as long as they want to pay the patent, unless if there's someone who wants to buy it, if whatever they've appraised it at, if somebody else, some other corporation thinks that they could make much better use of it for the good of society, make much more money from it, then they should be able to buy that patent out from them. I don't know, or for example, let's say you create some kind of widget and you think that it's worth, $10 million, then maybe the percentage of that, you should pay a certain percentage for it every year for holding on to that. And if somebody comes along and they're willing to offer $10 million to buy that patent and make it themselves, they wouldn't actually need to ask your permission. They would just go ahead and do it. And you could take the money or you could not take the money. It's up to you whether you take the money or not. But if they're willing to appraise it that high, then they should just be able to use it. Obviously, they can make better use of it than you can because they're willing to pay that much for it. So there are ways to use market dynamics to solve problems like this. I don't know exactly what those exact figures would be or should be, if there is a way to specify that. But so some kind of a mechanism like that can be implemented. That would take more careful consideration. But eventually I want to write something up like that, inspired by Joe's idea. I yield.
Your idea inspires me too. I mean, that is absolutely brilliant. What I think needs to be worked through is, you know, benefiting all aspects of society. Right there, you figured out a way to benefit fairly the patent holder. I don't see what this will do though for the public, because the person who buys that patent could then use their leverage to jack up prices or whatever. Because remember, they might be able to pay whatever they want for the tax on the patent. So maybe some additional tax clause for the buyer of the patent, above and beyond what the originator of the invention had put on them.
That's an interesting observation. Yeah, maybe. Yeah, I think there are ways to handle that.
Okay, cool. Right
I
on.
had a question again. If somebody has a really, really big invention and they know that this is going to benefit the public, but they know that the amount that they can receive for it, they know it's going to be, this is not the right word, but confiscated. And they know that the most that they can hope to gain from this invention is less than they could gain in the marketplace. Is this going to keep people from really going out there and putting their all into it, because there's going to be this obvious cap on what they can make if it's confiscated?
Well, I think in an ideal design of a system, it should be such that the greatest thing that could ever happen to you is have the public buy out your invention. That means you have arrived, and not just the accolades, but the actual, you know, money and, you know, and compensation that goes into that. And I'd like for that to work into it. What I don't want is some acquiring a patent on it just because they know the leverage it has on society. How do you rule that out? And again, I don't know, maybe it's what happens to the, you know, taxation wise to the person who acquires it. What regulations do they have put on them as far as pricing and that kind of thing? So what can we do to not interrupt progress and innovation, but still be fair?
Yeah, how can you possibly hope for the people to adequately compensate? How will we determine adequate compensation if the market doesn't take care of it?
Oh, you take out the middleman? What if we, the people, could compete on the market just like any other entity? Collectively, just like a corporation does.
Please say more.
I said it exactly what it is. You know, what if things that could be publicly owned could be benefiting us? You know, so say someone has a private patent on something, the public buys it. Now it becomes publicly owned.
So how do we define public? Go ahead, Cesar.
Yeah, so I think it could be, I mean, you could write it into law. I mean, of course, you could write anything you want into law. That, you know, that there is like a buyout option, and that the government has the first, you know, the first call on that. And the government could actually just compensate. Or I mean, it could be the government, or I guess it could be any coalition of citizens who just, maybe there should be like a coalition, you know, of like
Bidding.
Wealthy, you know, donors who pool their money together for like some kind of a non-for-profit that identifies what are the most useful inventions and just buys them out for the public. Here's your $1 million. Now this is public. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Well, there's a thing called right of first refusal. And that might be what you're talking about. And which means that, you know, don't sell it for less than this unless you talk to me first. But if you can get more for it, go ahead and try.
Can you say that again?
Right of first refusal is if you have something to sell, that you make an agreement with someone that you'll allow them the chance to buy it first for at or above the price you're selling it. So I'm like, if I'm going to sell it at or below the price that you and I agree with, I would have to go first to you. If I'm going to sell it above the price I agree with, I have to give you a chance to try to up your bid to that, or basically, you're free. You can sell it to anyone.
If Sazadi, do you have another comment? Okay, I wanted to talk about, you said like people with a lot of money, let's say a millionaire, a billionaire, they can buy out the patent for the public. Well, there's nothing stopping people from doing that now. That's a great idea. How would we, I think this is a great idea. How would we incentivize people? How would we reward people to spend their money on stuff for the public? I just throw that out there to you guys. I think that that's great, a great idea.
That actually wasn't my idea. I mean, I think it's great that people would want to do that, to buy something for public benefit, just like they do when they buy, acres and acres of, untouched forest to save for posterity. That's something that private citizens have done. So I don't see why they couldn't buy up patents for the sake of public benefit as well. But I had more the idea that, we, the people operating as a governmental body, whatever, represented by, state, federal, agencies, could buy up things like forests, like we do, to make into national parks, or could buy up things like patents. I'd say, why not? Could do things like, create our own insurance or buy insurance at a group rate, just the same way that your employer does. We should, if we're going to promote capitalism, let's do it all the way and say that, hey, we can be a big player in this collectively.
Actually, could I take a little bit of ask you a little bit of questions on the currency side as well? Because to me, there, just like Chris said, I'm mostly for democracy wherever possible. Like, democratizing the media would be nice, instead of being in the capitalist domain, or even school systems. I'm not sure, but I think one of the very few things is a currency system. A currency system with interest rate control, with banking guarantees and things like that. Even just over 100 years ago, America did not have a Federal Reserve because and often had bank runs, and bank runs meaning that in the boom and bust cycles of the business cycle, often people would go to the bank, run to the bank and try to take all their money out, and causing banks to fail, until the Federal Reserve offered guarantees, and which was something invented in Europe hundreds of years before the US Federal Reserve decided to do that. So the point being, centralization of certain things does make sense. And even cryptocurrencies, although there's decentralized components, in the end, it's if you're using Bitcoin is one thing, right? And there are thousands of cryptocurrencies. So I'm not sure if that applies. That's my comment, Joe.
Are you saying that you're not sure if cryptocurrencies should be allowed, or are they effective?
Oh, no, I'm not sure if the domain of currency applies as a intellectual property that should be shared in the, it's a system, right? Currency is a system. I'm not sure if it should be counted as a intellectual property that they're protecting for their own selfish purposes. Almost like sometimes it's better to group things together, like like have one military instead of many, not compete with each other. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I totally get what you mean. Now, thing is that ideally, I think that our treasury and reserve would be completely run and owned by we the people. Part of the reason for, I think, having a digital currency that any group could generate is to get out from under the system we're currently in, where it's kind of half privatized and half public, and done according to fractional reserve, and it causes, I think, economic problems that we can't come out from under. So yeah, ideally it'd be great to have one currency, but the only other reason I could see for having a local currency is it could help with local spending, and local spending is good for the ecology. It's also good for creating, jobs that otherwise people wouldn't get, even if they're repetitive. You got 1,000 mom and pop stores, that might be better than one Costco, say, overall for the people economically. As far as what it can do for wages, what it can do for availability, locality of services, whatever. There was one other thing that you mentioned there that I wanted to address, and I can't think. Oh yes. Treating currency like an invention. All right. It might not be looked at that way, but I think it functions that way, because if you look at it, unless we can prove that we are fulfilling some niche in society, it's illegal for us to print currency. So obviously the Federal Reserve has really got some kind of a sweetheart deal. We're forced to take their currency. There's really nothing else we can do unless we can prove that this other thing is functioning in some way that theirs can't. Yeah.
Thank you for that. Are there any final comments? Okay, let's move on to closing remarks. Everybody would have 30 seconds, I guess, to give final thoughts. Cynthia, or no, you have something in your mouth. Did you want to wait?
I'm all good, thanks.
Okay.
Thank you so much. I'm very grateful for having been able to listen to this conversation. I actually learned a lot, and it got my wheels spinning. So I might be writing some ideas tonight. Who knows? But thank you so much for the inspiration. Love and gratitude.
Awesome, Cynthia. Thank you. Ricardo? Any final comments?
Yeah. Thank you, Sherwin. Well, actually, I came more to listen than because I was supposed to. I'm not supposed, but I wanted to present today. But it's best that I didn't, because I had no idea what the format was. Now I do. So I came basically to listen up. To get an idea and to meet you guys. Well, I know half of you already. But the idea is next week I have a better idea what to present. Thank you, Staci. What to present, Joe, I'm going to talk to you, and what to present next week, and such that it molds in the format that seems to be working here. That's it.
All right. I'll put you on the hot seat. Chris, final comments?
Just a brief thing. I don't know much about currencies. I know we have a Federal Reserve, private bankers influencing. I know, Wall Street has a lot of power, but we seem to have, there's other parts of the world. This is China behind me, a brand new library. They didn't need any Federal Reserve. They didn't need any, bankers to tell them, hey, we need this library. They built it. So, I'm not that worried about this. I think it's just a matter of convincing the public that this is inherently wrong to have these private bankers making all the decisions for us. And thanks for everything. It's really, this is great. And I'm looking forward to more. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much for your comments, Chris. Cesario, would you like to go next?
Sure. Actually, I thought Ricardo was going to be presenting today, and I was looking forward to that. But I guess hopefully next time. I want to see how he undergoes the crucible. Also, I tried to message you, Chris, in the chat. I wanted to ask you if you've been to any of our regular citizen assemblies, and hopefully you can join us. And that's all. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Cesare. Stacy.
Yeah, this was a great discussion. It's an interesting idea. It's a difficult one to wrap my mind around. And I really appreciate the comments tonight and what developed out of it, because I really did. I also learned something and have some ideas. It stretched my mind. So thank you very much for that mind stretching. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you very much, Stacy, for reviewing today. I'll go before giving Joe the final word. Joe, it was a very good, well presented idea. And Stacy, thank you so much for the review. I think definitely helped everybody think more through these issues, and me as well. So thank you for that. Joe, final remarks?
Yeah, that was a really bang up presentation. Stacy, really thank you for looking in depth at my essay. Cesare, thank you for that really great idea too, about taxing someone according to what they assess the value of their invention to be. That sounds like a very, very interesting start to a solution. And I want to say to everyone, I really thank you for being patient enough to sit through this. I hope it was enlightening and entertaining for you. Anything we can do to make the process better is always helpful and interactive for you. And I realize that if I'm presenting or I'm hosting or I'm co-presenting, another one of me, Stacy's or Sherwin's roles, that I can forget that you guys are there patiently listening. And I like to figure out a way to make it so that you can be more a part of it. Maybe if we had longer meetings, that would be helpful, because give everyone a chance to speak. We'll think of that. Any suggestions you have, though, go ahead and put them in the chat here, and that's going to be delivered to me after this meeting is over.
Thank you, Joe. We will now wrap up the meeting. If you like the idea presented, log on and support them in agora-ilp.org. Also in Agora, you will find information for upcoming meetings. And finally, like and join our group, Citizen Assembly, on Facebook. Either after a meeting or a separate meeting, Stacy, co-creator of the Crucible, is available to discuss her own constitutional checklist of 36 holistic principles, or even to help you develop your own. Contact us for more info. Thank you very much, guys.
Okay.